I'm riding along in my automobile. Andrew beside me at the wheel. Roby in the back making a smile. The speedometer's going wide. It's not.
So it takes
60 miles per hour.
We're driving
Exactly.
legally.
No, it ain't. Yo, ass.
Hey y'all, it's Andrew and Roby and James with Free Tours by Foot New Orleans, and we are on part 3 of our road trip up the Mississippi. We're about to get into Baton Rouge, and all 3 of us have lived here at different points, so we know this city decently well, and it's not a destination, frankly, but it's on the way to a lot of places. You know, if you decided you wanted to visit Lafayette, this is probably the way you'd go from New Orleans, going out to Cajun country. Also, for our road trip, going up to the towns beyond it, Baton Rouge is there. And it's not that there's not things there to see. It's that people don't know there are things there to see. And that kind of includes people who live in Baton Rouge. So, and even if you were just going to drive through this, there's some stuff that really is worth improving the drive, I'll say. So what we're going to show you is a way to drive through town. Absolutely, you can go through on the interstate the whole way, and if you're a connoisseur of, let's say, ambulance chaser billboards, you'll love it. But if not, then there are other better alternatives, and we're going to show you a route through that, and even some stops that you could make. So we're beginning by taking the exit right by Blue Bayou
Water Park.
To make our way along Highland Road, one of the older roads in town. Oh my God.
No, this is
Look at all this.
Yeah, this is all very new.
Yeah, well, it's all very new, and it wants to look really old.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is, so there's actual plantation type stuff out here, but then there's stuff that just looks the part and likes that stuff. So yeah, this is, as the name Highland Road suggests, this is the high ground. Just like in New Orleans, the river is the high ground, and so you get the river road through there. Down here, the river is, or up here, the river is the low ground, and so you have a road set back from the river that ran between plantations. And so this was well outside of Baton Rouge. Baton Rouge originally was just this little village on the river, and it stayed tiny well into New Orleans being really sizable. This was before it was the state capital. So when you go back in time, Baton Rouge is a little younger than New Orleans. It's still old enough to have some French and Spanish influence. It was part of French exploration in the region. It was owned by Spain longer than New Orleans was, and it was also British for a couple of decades. But it just didn't develop as much during that time, so you don't see those things as big. And also, the people who live here are less aware of the history of their own town because it was a village for so long. It really only blew up after like 20th century and after the World Wars. And so people who are here, unlike New Orleanians who often have many, many generations deep of connection with their city, folks here are maybe 3 generations in at most, and often not even that much. Plus, it's a city not bounded by water in the way New Orleans is, so there's just room for it to grow and grow and grow. So there's a lot of sprawl here, which can keep you at a long distance from those historical roots. So for all of those reasons, it's not that Baton Rouge doesn't have history, it's not that it even doesn't have visible history, it's that people are less familiar with it. But there are places that show it pretty openly. And on a drive through town, not only does Highland Road show some of it on its own, but it also brings you to some other areas that do as well. Y'all, towards the end of Highland Road, near where it reaches the old downtown area, you hit LSU's campus, Louisiana State University, and you'll know you're here because the buildings look pretty consistent. You've got this Italian Renaissance look with Spanish tile roofs all over the campus. And originally, this university was located over by where our state capitol is now. It was a military college, so hence you get the big open parade ground even on the present campus. And it was located in some old military headquarters located near the state capitol. But it moved here and extremely expanded under Huey Long, who took it basically from this obscure little regional university to being kind of an A-lister of its day, and did that largely by building new stuff. Huey Long, we made a little bit of a mention of during our bike ride up the Mississippi as somebody who built a lot of big things like that bridge, and he was somebody who would do whatever it took to get his stuff built. So more on him in a little bit. But basically transformed this campus, and the little bit of the historic core you see is pretty close to where you'd be doing the drive-through on our recommended route. This is actually originally planned by the Olmsted firm, Frederick Law Olmsted and his partners, who planned our Audubon Park in New Orleans and Central Park in New York, along with lots and lots of other landscape spots.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so this is based on plans by them, even though it ended up in some other folks' hand over time.
Coincidentally, whenever I was in the military, I did drill out here on the parade ground. We would come out here during special events, and they would always hire the military to come out here and either do a color guard down the walkway here, or we would just do a presentation out here. So this is very significant to me. Just years ago, of the person that I used to be, and also am no longer. It's
been a while since you were in the military.
It's been a long time since I was in the military. So now I'm fabulous.
So with Huey P. Long being such a big influence in the history of LSU, one of his big projects to make this a prestige university was to up the profile of the football program. And voila, it was a pretty huge success. Football is kind of the thing people know LSU for now, and the football team is the main source of revenue for the university.
Oh, yes.
Which says maybe more about state funding to schools in Louisiana than anything, but it is where most other things are living on. So, and college football in general, y'all, is huge in the South. Professional football was late to the party, and in general it came about later than college football, and it was a much later arrival down here. So generally when people are watching, say, the Saints, it's a smaller number of people than are going to gather around an LSU game. And of course, this campus churns out tons of people, so...
Y'all, I'm so excited. I'm sorry. I went to school here.
And went to every football game.
And I had to go to every football game, and the reason is because, all right, so there's a whole story. I'm gonna let Andrew get back to what he's talking about, but there's a whole story behind that. Go ahead, sorry.
Feel free.
So here's the deal. I was in the military. I was in the Navy for some number of years, and I was actually not stationed at a military base, but I was at a military unit. And every time LSU would have a football game, they would hire my unit to come clean that stadium. Now,
oh my God.
Let me tell y'all, this stadium is huge.
Cinderella.
When I tell y'all it is huge, it is big. Can you imagine a ragtag group of people, like all of us from this little tiny little naval unit, cleaning that whole stadium from top to bottom by ourselves?
This is like the 6th largest stadium in the world.
In the world,
seats
y'all.
like 100,000 plus people.
I have found diamond rings. I have found brand new CDs. I have found a jury out the
CDs
wazoo.
tells you when this was.
Yeah, when this was. Yeah, I was in college 2003, 2000 till 2005, 6 or 7, somewhere around there. But the stadium is very significant to me because eventually I transferred to LSU. And when I transferred to LSU after I was at the old place where the naval unit was, like, I spent a lot of time at football games. Just not even, for those of you who are trying to figure out if I like football, no, I don't. I went to the games because of the atmosphere. You know, people outside tailgating, people like cheering and the little rivalries and stuff like that. That was fun. That was a lot of fun. So there's a whole culture based around just that and not the game.
And when people are coming here, there's just like with Baton Rouge at large, there's like this sense of what it is now, even though there's history underneath it. People aren't always seeing that. And one of the things that's really easy to miss about the history of this building is how it came to be this large in the first place. So their original stadium just seated 10,000 odd people. Huey P. Long wanted it to grow enormously. And so what he did was, this was actually somebody else's idea, but it was right up Huey P. Long's alley. He couldn't get money for a stadium increase, but he could get money for housing. And so the head of athletics at LSU at the time suggested, why don't we build dorms into the stadium and basically put the seating on top of them? And so you could live, I don't know about could, it sounds like a privilege. You could be forced to live in the stadium anytime between when that happened in the 30s all the way up to about when we were born in the 80s.
In the 80s.
So my dad lived in that stadium for a little bit. I understand, quite a loud experience, but it also makes the games a lot louder because the structure of the building makes the seating extremely steep it locks in sound, and it also gives a better view of the field. So there's kind of what serious football fans regard as a real distinct fan experience at this stadium, and those are some of the factors that go into it.
I used to live not too far from here on a street called Carlotta Street, and it's famous for the Halloween parties every single year. And whenever I was there, when they would do the football games here in the stadium, you can feel the ground from all the cheering and all the stumping and the whoos and the ahs. You can actually feel it at the bottom of your feet in the building. And that street is like off campus. Like, that's how big and like how loud this stadium can get.
Yeah, and don't try to do the drive that we're recommending on a game day. So definitely take a look in advance and make sure nothing's going on here. Speaking of tailgating, we're on a very popular former tailgating spot, one of the places you're not allowed to tailgate anymore. And this goes back to the Huey P. Long endeavor, too. We're on one of the spots that even as he was transforming the shape of Baton Rouge, and especially of LSU, he circled a couple spots on the map to be preserved. And we are standing on those circles right now.
Yeah, we're actually on top of what they call Indian mounds. I call them Native American mounds. These are some of the oldest mounds in the entire world. There's one scientist, when I was doing research for this, one scientist said that these mounds are around 6,000 years old, and another scientist, after doing some sediment testing, he thinks that these are actually close to 12,000 years old. 11,300 years old, to be exact, is what he put down. So this is we're standing on sacred ground right now, which is important to me being a high priest. They did some testing of the sediments in the soil and stuff, and they found like charcoal, they found bones, they found some artifacts, and of course dated them to the time periods that I just mentioned. But these were here before the pyramids. I have a memory of James when we were kids. He told me when he first came here one time that he rolled down these mounds, and then we came back later in age and he did it. James rolled down these mounds, and to this day I still don't know how you did it, James. You ain't got all cut up and no bites anything. I wasn't gonna ask you to do it, but I have fond memories of these mounds, not just from going to school here, but also just James in general. These mounds are still here. Like, you can still come visit. This is one of the things I would highly recommend you come visit if you decide to come to Baton Rouge, and especially here at LSU. Some of the oldest structures on this continent are here. Please
possibly come. In the world.
Possibly in the world.
And if anyone's not familiar with Native American mounds, this is a really common feature of regional Native American cultures. These ones are a lot older than many of the ones we have. We'll see some younger ones as we go up to Natchez, the last chapter of this trip. But at the time when colonization was happening in this region, getting to the 15 and 1600s, Native American mound building cultures were still actively inhabiting mound sites, and colonization was so disruptive by way of the diseases that it introduced that those mound sites were largely abandoned by the time, say, New Orleans was founded. So our understanding of the history of them is pretty poor, because by the time real French occupation happened, even the Native Americans of the region don't seem to have fully understood what those sites were about. Their history had been so shaken up.
There's so many of these mounds that probably still exist that we just don't know about. We probably see them now because of time being eroded away as like little small hills or something in the woods or whatever, but these things were very common across history. And of course, through time and colonization, they've been either destroyed or eroded away because the tribes of people moved on, any number of factors. But the fact that we even still have these two, and they found out that these might be the oldest ones in the world, says everything.
And in terms of how they were used, the ones that are referred to as belonging to Mississippian culture, which is kind of the proto-Native American culture of this region, often would have been the base of buildings. That doesn't seem to have been the case with these. There's no evidence of that. And in fact, apart from the discoveries that Roby mentioned, there's not a lot of artifacts to be found in this, which suggest it wasn't a site of day-to-day life. So it was probably a sacred site or a site that was used on a rare basis. And actually, one thing too is that the river, Mississippi, used to be within view of this. It's moved around a lot over time. In fact, one of my favorite maps in the world is the series of maps made by the Army Corps of Engineers showing the meanders in the Mississippi River and how much it moves from one era to the next. So at one time, standing on this, looking off to what for us is the left, you would have seen the river off in the distance, and people on the river would have seen this. And which one of those mattered, or if they both were important, We don't know, but it had some kind of relationship with the river, very possibly.
Across a lot of Native American cultures, water is like one of the most powerful and most sacred things that you can actually be around, or for anything spiritual for the most part. So I can only imagine like being on the river, even just canoeing, or with the river right there, or even standing here on top of the mound and like seeing the river right there and having this mound right here, like how powerful that must have been for those people back then.
Y'all, we are moving on from LSU, still keeping going along Highland Road, and it's going to take us to downtown. One other thing, though, about LSU that's worth mentioning, and this is LSU connected, but it's not on LSU's site. We've talked a lot about plantations during the course of this trip, and we're still going to see some more, but all of those places are kind of obligated to tell the story of their own site, which is always a really specific story. Whereas LSU has a place called the Rural Life Museum, which takes up this huge amount of space, just invisibly, right next to the highway in Baton Rouge. And it has a plantation exhibit that tells a lot about the day-to-day working life of enslaved people, overseers, the people doing most of the labor. But it also gets into the lives of people in parts of the state where you wouldn't have found so many plantations, people outside of plantation life, craft demonstrations, and this is an amalgamation of material from lots of different places, but it's able to tell a bigger story. So if you're interested in the kind of plantation and otherwise kind of local history stuff that we've been getting into with these various houses, that's a spot not to miss, and it's a really easy one to miss. So be sure and look that up if you're going to be passing through town.
We also, by the way, we're about the very first Raising Cane's in existence.
Oh, yeah.
Priorities.
That was the first one for real.
It was a LSU Business School class project.
Also, this is the neck of the woods where some of my family still lives. I have a lot of family. My mom's side of the family, when they migrated from Bayou Sara, some of them landed here and been here for like 2 generations.
Get down, Roby.
Yeah, get down. Oh, yeah.
I meant hide, but
They can't see past these tinted windows, but this side of LSU also is where one of the most popular and local gay bars is located.
That's right.
Which when I was in school was a big deal because in those years, you know, coming out the closet and being a person of color as well, you didn't really have too many safe spaces, and this was one of the safe spaces.
Well, we got to the end of Highland Road, did some wiggling, and made our way down to the riverfront. So here we are up against the Mississippi, and this is the neighborhood where Baton Rouge began. This is kind of in the way that the French Quarter is the point of genesis for New Orleans. This is that for Baton Rouge, and it goes back a pretty similar amount of time. So formally, you start to see communities here in 1805, but prior to that, you have these kind of informal military outposts. And the name comes from early French exploration. So that name, Baton Rouge, which means red stick, comes from the expeditions up the river being guided by, a little ways further up the river around where Southern University is today, this red pole that was the dividing marker between hunting territories of the Bayagula people and the Homa people further up the river. So the spot has been named Baton Rouge since well before there was really any serious colonial presence here. The stuff we have today, you can see from here, a lot of the better attractions. We have a train station turned museum here in the foreground. We have our old state capitol and our new state capitol, both, which we'll get closer glimpses of. And a few other appealing things along the riverfront that we'll spend a minute exploring.
Interesting tidbit. The 3 of us used to play out here as kids. Like, where we from is not too far away. And like, it was not this built up when we was out here. Like when we was kids, it was way more run down. And of course, we were still googly-eyed whenever we come out here as kids anyway. So here inside of this museum, they have a mission to the moon that most of us actually did as kids, and my class never made it. So basically what you do, all your classmates come together, and then they give each classmate a job, and then they put us in this like fake space station, and our jobs are to work together to make it to the moon. And it was such a big deal to make it to the moon, especially, this was 1996, y'all. I was in 6th grade. We never made it. I want to go back as an adult, and I want to get to the moon.
It was like an escape room before there were escape rooms, except you escaped to the moon. Roby has an incredible memory. This is all way out of my mind by now.
Yeah. I remember strange things. But downtown Baton Rouge is where it's at. Like, if you ever visit Baton Rouge, you coming from Texas, you coming from up north or whatever, and you want to come to this city, but you want to go to a spot that's kind of hopping, but not like too crowded, this is where to come to. It's actually free to walk the levee. You can literally just come out here and just walk the levee, sit out here at night and watch the sunset. You can even see the moon rise out here. It's actually a pretty ideal place like for a romantic getaway, and it's free to the public.
The Mississippi is really beautiful from here. You've got even more things to do, which we'll get over to seeing a few more of them.
Something else since I was a kid.
What's that?
The river circles, when you throw your coin into it to get good luck from Oshun,
Oh, yeah.
the river spirit. When you see them swirling like that, you take a penny and you try to throw it into the circle, into the spiral. And if you make it in there, then she gives you good luck.
Nice. All right. So Andrew and Roby don't know about boats, I guess. So they asked me to talk about this boat. This is the USS Kidd, DD 661, which means it was the 661st boat ever built by the U.S. Navy. It was built in 1943, and it was named after an admiral who died on the Arizona in the Pearl Harbor bombings. But his name was Admiral Kidd, and everybody called him Cap after the pirate Captain Kidd, Captain William Kidd. And this boat kind of took on the nickname and the persona of the pirate. So I don't know if you can see in this shot, but they painted on the smokestack, and this is a historic painting that's been touched up, a painting of the pirate William Kidd. And so they were known as the Pirates of the Pacific. It was the only U.S. Navy ship that was ever allowed to fly the Jolly Roger, which seems ridiculous. Why would you let that happen? Who knows? But there it is. During World War II, this ship was attacked by a kamikaze bomber, split right in half, cut it right down the middle. It was later salvaged, and they were able to use it for training, and then it became a museum, which is what it is now. So you can actually come here and for a few dollars go tour the boat, check it all out, see the engines. When we were kids, we used to spend the night in Boy Scouts and whatever camps. You'd spend the night on the USS Kidd. So pretty cool boat you can come check out. Now the other boats that you're going to see down here are a little more controversial and related to Baton Rouge politics, and I'm going to let Andrew discuss that.
You can see it over past the Kidd, and so we've got off in the distance there what might, on a very short examination, look like a classic Mississippi steamboat. And of course those would have gone up this stretch for a long time. But that is a waterbound casino, and the gambling laws in Louisiana are strange and complex. But basically, you're allowed to have gambling as long as it's on the water. Depending on where in Louisiana it is, either it has to be on a docked vessel or it has to be on a moving vessel, or maybe there's an exception based on how bad the weather is. These are stuck in place. So there's a couple of boats along the riverfront in Baton Rouge that are not capable of moving away from their docks. They just have to be boats so that they can legally be casinos. And once you're on them, so the legislature has a lot to do with letting these things exist. And therefore, state government officials are not allowed to have any kind of financial relationship with these casinos unless they're performing live music in them. So patronage can definitely be a problem every now and then in Louisiana, but the music industry so rarely is on the receiving end of it. So it's a refreshing bit of nepotism that we don't get to see too often. Yeah, we're working our way back down from the riverfront to check out the state capitol. We're passing by the old state capitol, which is this wild Gothic castle over here. Also visitable, stained glass ceiling, all kinds of cool stuff. But generally in downtown, you don't see as much building preservation as you would in, say, the French Quarter in New Orleans, but there are a few real treasures, so we're gonna pass by some of the pre- and post-Civil War buildings made before and shortly after the war, just to give you a taste of what this neighborhood would have looked like in its early days. Y'all, on the way to the state capitol, we're taking a pause by a spot that actually has some personal history for Roby and some really important, bigger history for the country that I knew nothing about before we decided to make this video. So Roby's gonna enlighten me. I'm gonna shut up and listen.
Yeah, I'll pull some resources, and I actually talked to some of my family about this one too as well. So I sang at this church. This is Mount Zion First Baptist Church. And when I was a kid, we used to travel all across the country from Baptist church to Baptist church just singing and stuff. And I didn't know this either as well. Like, I found out later that this place was significant as far as civil rights go. So Reverend T.J. Jamison in the street, there's a street named after him near here. He was responsible for a big movement as far as black people sitting on buses. For those of you who don't know, black people were only allowed to ride public transportation if they sat at the back of the bus. Y'all familiar with Rosa Parks? But believe it or not, Rosa Parks was not the first black woman to actually stand her ground. There were many black people who actually stood their ground on buses, not getting up and allowing a white person to sit down before her. It's just that she made the most noise about it, I guess. She was tired and refused to get up. This is less than 100 years ago. So this is why this is less than 100 years ago. So this is why this is so important to me, because there are people who are alive now who can tell you this story. So the community here got really angry about the whole situation about black people sitting at the back of the bus or getting up to allow white people to sit down in their place. So Reverend T.J. Jamison got together with some of the people here in the community, and they met at McKinley High School, not too far from here, and they came up with a plan. They was like, we're tired of this. Something needs to be done. The city at that time had shut down a lot of the black public transportation. And one of the things that they did, which was a big deal back in the 50s, you gotta remember the time period, is that a white-owned, black-oriented radio station put word out for all the black people in the city of Baton Rouge to not ride the bus. Do not get on the bus, turn your back to the bus. There will be cars waiting for you to get into the car beside the bus to take you to your job, to take you to your work, to take you to school. And they set a date and they did it. The buses all lined up at the bus stations, bunch of white, black, purple, green people all out there. All the white people got on the bus and all the black people literally turned around and turned their backs to the bus. On the side streets were black people in cars waiting to pick these people up and take them where they needed to go. So in a sense, they literally like bottlenecked and choked like the white bus companies and kind of like forced them to allow more black people to ride the bus because they were losing out on money. Here's where the controversy sets in. So Reverend T.J. Jamison, instead of him kind of like saying, hey, allow white, black, purple, green people to get on the bus and let everybody sit where they sit, don't let nobody get up. What they did was just allow more seats in the back for black people to sit down in. So there's a lot of black people around still angry about that right now. I say good job, Rev, because it kind of set the ball rolling. In Georgia, they did a similar situation and Martin Luther King Jr. got involved as well. So that's why this place is very significant as far as civil rights go.
Yeah, bus boycotts being a staple of the civil rights movement.
Speaking of buses, there's one passing us right now, and like...
What did I tell y'all about personal injury lawyers?
Really?
They own every square foot of flat surface in the city.
It's for me, it's such a big deal, simply because, like, I'm a person of color. Y'all see that. I'm black. Like, you don't get no blacker than this. If you get more black than this, I'll be blue. Hence all the blue. But like to see a bus ride past and knowing that I'm standing in front of a church. My mom grew up here, and Reverend Jamison is responsible for me. If I want to catch that bus right there at the bus stop, I can go get on that bus right now and sit anywhere I like. This place, him here, is responsible for that. And I just, thank you, Rev, thank you.
Y'all, at last, we are at the tallest landmark in the neighborhood and the tallest state capitol in the entire United States. This is very much like a destination for anybody who lives in the region. You go here for field trips when you're a kid. And when I was a child, I was terrified of this building. You can see it as you do the drive into town, and I would like hide in the back seat, and I called it the Big Bad Building. So it's imposing. That is what Huey P. Long wanted. He wanted to terrify the children of future generations. And so we talked about Huey Long as a guy who was very much about changing the face of Baton Rouge and the whole state. We saw one of his bridges down the way. And here in town, when he first became governor, the old state capitol that we saw a little bit ago was the one that was in use. And it was not quite big enough for all of the things function, so building another state capitol was kind of a given, but he went over the top. And this was an old military complex turned LSU campus he also wanted to blow LSU way, way, way bigger. And so what he did to make that possible is he used the state to buy the site from LSU so that then LSU would get the money for its expansion and he would have the site for the massive new thing he wanted to build. So again, a guy who would make things happen by pretty much whatever means necessary. It's really unusual to see Art Deco state capitals, to see skyscraper state capitals. There's not very many, and this was the thing that kind of second in a litany of those based on one of the ones in the Midwest. So with all that ambition, he left behind this massive building, thousands of miles of additional roads and highways in Louisiana, and also like created the state's homestead exemption policy. A whole lot of big differences he made. And then the things he supported that didn't happen, like a universal basic income, very serious wealth taxes. I mean, stuff that is kind of outside the norm, let's say, even today. And to get those things, he was willing to threaten, bribe, fire people who he didn't like, just about whatever it took. And when you come here to visit, you see a monument of him that speaks to, let's say, how things ended, because when you pay the visit inside, one of the things you see is the bullet hole in the wall that was made during the process of his assassination while he was a state senator. He made a lot of people mad during that time, basically kept running Louisiana. He was kind of governor and a senator at the same time, which you're not supposed to do. And he made a lot of federal enemies by, at one point, this is not a record, remarkably, but he spoke for about 15 hours during a filibuster process. So just any means necessary. Anyway, having made enough enemies in the country and here, it was kind of almost bound to happen one way or another, but he was ultimately shot by the son-in-law of one of his political rivals in Louisiana. A lot of questions about that story. His story in general is way bigger than we can get into the full depths of, but there's some of the basic framework. So his legacy, the full height of this thing, and lots to see inside.
Lots to see inside. And Andrew made a very valid point about grandiose, like things just being so big when it comes to him, like LSU, and then all of a sudden, boom, huge expansion. The state capitol, boom, look how big it is. You can actually tour the state capitol. And if you go all the way up to the top, I think his idea, this is just my opinion, is to go to the top of the state capitol and look, and you can see all the things that he's created, like the big old giant LSU campus. You can see the bridge from up there. You can see all of Baton Rouge. And I think his idea was like to make his stamp and to show everybody like how grandiose he was and how big he was. And the state capitol is definitely an example of that. By the way, they used to sell, I don't know if it was real or fake, Confederate money up there. And in the gift shop up there at the top. I don't know if they do that today, but what we used to do as kids, we would go on field trips up there, and I would go to the gift shop and we would buy this Confederate money. And this may get cut out, but we take it home and burn it.
Confederate bills, I promise you that was not real.
It probably wasn't real, but it was like actual paper bills, and they said it was Confederate money. And we would take it back home, and we would just burn it, just to be like, nope, no. So there's a piece of Roby story with this.
And finally, he has one other monument, like I mentioned, which is a pretty worshipful image of him, and he's also buried here. So looking forever at one of his last projects, and hustled to the end, y'all. He managed to get this whole thing built in 14 months so that it would be finished during his term as governor. So while this shows him towering over it, I think Roby's got the right idea about what he wanted from his legacy.
He was not shame about it, I tell you that.
Not. Y'all, finally, if there's one neighborhood that actually gives you kind of a French Quarter ambiance in Baton Rouge, it's the oldest one, which is where we are now. This is called Spanish Town. And Spanish Town was the first incorporated neighborhood here, founded in 1805 as a place for folks from the Canary Islands to relocate from another much less successful settlement further down south. And so when you hear it called Spanish Town, that speaks to its origin and this kind of separation from the other small cities around it. But ultimately, most of it gets destroyed during the Civil War and rebuilt. So what you see today as you explore is this very bungalow-style, early 20th century residential neighborhood that is a little bit outfitted for visitors, but mainly is a place for its own residents. So there's some places to hang out. There's a lot of good eye candy to see buildings-wise, and it has that ambiance of narrow streets that were never built for cars, and everything's squeezed a little tighter and a little cozier. So a walk around here and maybe sitting down for a meal or a coffee here is a good way to sign off from Baton Rouge and get maybe one of the most underappreciated sides of it. Unless you are here during the Mardi Gras season, in which case Spanish Town deserves a touch more of your attention. And I leave that to our resident expert on Spanish Town Mardi Gras, James.
I'm not an expert, but we did it growing up, Spanish Town Mardi Gras. They started it in 1981 as kind of an answer to New Orleans Mardi Gras, right? As a way for Baton Rouge to get in on the action. And it started out small, but it got bigger and bigger, and it's still just one parade that happens the Saturday before Mardi Gras, and it's a daytime parade, but it's become one of the raunchiest parades that there is. It is not something you bring the kids to. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of local political humor, a lot of dirty jokes. It was started by a bunch of old hippies in 1981, you can imagine. So it kind of tends to land along those vibes. My parents were part of a group called the Crew of Yazoo that's known for pushing lawnmowers and dancing with the lawnmowers in elaborate costumes. And so it's always a good time. And it's a great way to experience Mardi Gras without having to deal with the all-consuming Mardi Gras of New Orleans. So a little more relaxed, but not family friendly.
Right. So if you were counting on Baton Rouge to entertain your children primarily, yes, little bit of censorship necessary there. Guys, we are right by the highway that brings us out of Baton Rouge and onto, in our case, our hometown of St. Francisville, but in your case, perhaps over to Lafayette. Basically, if you're doing a pass-through, as we recommend, and exploring other places from here, this is probably where you would sign off from the city. So we're gonna head on the next leg of our journey, but if y'all like what you see, please let us know. Any thoughts down there in the comments? And we will see you soon in the next chapter. If you want to tip your guides, you're going to find collective tipping information down below. Thanks for spending the time with us, and we will see you shortly a little further up the river.
Thank y'all so much. We love y'all so much. Y'all have been so great, stopping us on the street and letting us know that y'all been watching the videos and recognizing us. We are surprised by this. So thank y'all so much for your support. We're going to keep doing this as long as y'all keep watching.
It's a thrill. See you soon.
Bye.